Okay, now we are live.
Now we're live.
Got that. Okay. Anyway, so
That was a great point that you just made, though.
never to be repeated again.
Never to repeat.
Yeah. So good. I mean, last week, good week. Little tense just because of this house move we need to be doing now. I still got some time for it, but like that's going on. And aside for that, the high holidays are upon us, and Israel, the country, basically, as you know, I'm sure, as you remember, shuts down. I don't know, when did you leave Israel?
2011.
You've been back since to visit, I'm assuming, no?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, but 2011, you've been out. Okay, you've been out for a while.
So
it's all different now. There's color. But that obviously affects my work as well. So let's say during Chol HaMoed, during this period, which is not really necessarily the holiday, in Jerusalem and a lot of these projects I work at, there's no work. And Palestinian labor are not going to get their permits to come in so much into some of these cities. Either way, it slows things down. And of course, before the high holidays, everyone wants their stuff in immediately, just before the holiday. I see. Smokehead of Jewish study. Okay.
I don't know if I was on a stream, and I think my last name was there, so he got a taste of it, and now he's making puns out of it, I think.
I see. Okay, but so you're also obviously welcome to join as well, Eliyahu. All right, so where do we stop? You opened it up, Avir. I see Rabbi Tarfon. Okay, so let's kick it into. Oh, I think we're actually at the end of Perek Bet of the second chapter.
I think that is the I think the next one is the last.
Okay, so we'll do two of these. We'll start the next one. Well, we'll see. We'll see where we go. All right, Rabbi Tarfon אומר, היום קצר והמלאכה מרובה, והפועלים עצלים, והשכר הרבה, ובעל הבית דוחק. Rabbi Tarfon would say, the day is short, the work is much. The workers are lazy, the reward is great, and the master is pressing. All right, so Rabbi Tarfon, the character we're dealing with over here, if you remember, recently we were talking about the 5 prize students of YBZ, Rav Yochanan Ben Zakkai. And Rabbi Tarfon was also a student of Rav Yochanan Ben Zakkai, but he was a younger student of his. He was a priest, and he lived during the temple. He also gives testament, like because he remembers the temple, the rabbis ask him, I think a few times during the Talmud, like, what does he remember? Sort of, he gives like a testament of like what he remembered. That was what he remembers at the time. When he was older, he obviously gives his testament, not when he was younger. He was very wealthy, a very, very wealthy man, had a lot of properties. Even this is also post destruction. And he was part of YBZ's crew, Yochanan Ben Zakkai, but he was obviously part of the younger part of the crew, and not the main man, not one of the, let's say the what is it called in basketball? Starting 5.
Starting 5.
No, it's the Chamisha Potachat, but that's like English.
I don't remember. Soccer. Ask me questions about soccer, and now
it shows how little I care or know about sports. But
either
way. He does.
I was gonna say that he sounds a little bit like a head of sales. He said he's a wealthy man.
He's giving you like this nice little.
Have you seen Glenn Ross? This is kind of like
this is Rabbi Tarfon's elevator pitch.
Yeah.
Okay. And what else do we know about him? That he was actually a student of but he held many times to the opinion of Shammai. We spoke about Shammai and Hillel in the past. he would have a lot of arguments with Rabbi Akiva, specifically because Rabbi Akiva, which Rabbi Akiva really comes and innovates this whole new system of a Torah apparatus with other schools, and he is also famously giving fantastical interpretations and even interpreting the shape of the letter itself when he gives his interpretation. Now, for Rabbi Tarfon, who remembers the temple, for him, he's more old school and he's Shammai. So he says they sometimes clash because Rabbi Akiva has like this fantastical understanding that he's reading into the text. And Rabbi Tarfon says, that's very nice, but like I remember what the sages during the temple said, and they said it was because of these reasons. Mm-hmm. Having said that, he was also very impressed by Rabbi Akiva as well. I forget the exact quote, but he very much is very much in favor of people listening to Rabbi Akiva, and he recognizes how great his insights are. Nevertheless, he himself was, I don't want to say stuck in his ways, but he was sort of like a old dog, new tricks kind of a situation with regards to his interpretation. What else do we have to say about Rabbi Tarfon? I think that's it. There's his name, Rabbi Tarfon, which I think comes from like Greek, from like tripod, or like a three. I think it's supposed to mean three, but I could be wrong about that. But I believe that's where his name comes from.
Yeah.
Okay. So Hayom Katzar. What are we talking about? That the Yom Katzar, and what's also this is clearly talking about, like, generally speaking, we know that the day itself is short, right? We have 24 hours. And part of that day is being used for the things like, there's sleep, there's rest, there's eating. So the actual time you have to do work is very limited. And we know this, obviously, today. We could see that every day, that we feel like there's never enough time.
Yeah.
We could also focus on the fact that we're not saying here that time is short, but the day is short. And you could look at this as the day which is allotted for Torah study. Basically, it's not like there's general time that one could use, but I'm already controlling for that time, because I know there's going to be time where you need to speak to your son, and there's time where you need to build that treehouse. But now I'm giving you time which is net Torah study, and that time itself is also going to be very, very short.
Yeah.
Generally speaking, because it's also such a short little statement, you could be sure there's like a lot of packed into this, which is taking a step back and looking at, let's say, the general day, which is like the shortest day of the week is Friday, and that would be the shortest amount of time you have to spend during the day, and it's the busiest, which is v'hamelacha merubah, and the work is much, because you're going to have to be getting the house ready for Shabbat, preparing it, all the stuff, and you only have a little time. Yeah. And if we zoom out, we're then looking at sort of the universal seventh day in a certain extent. Basically, like we're the whole world, 6,000 years. We're in this last millennia. We're in this pace right now where it almost feels like there's been like this ever increasing, starting from, let's say, the Neanderthal to now. There's like, and ever since like the Industrial Revolution, we feel like there's a sense like we're really moving towards something in this crazy hyper accelerated speed.
Right.
And you could look at that as, really the whole world in a certain extent is in this sixth day, getting ready for the seventh day, where like there's a tremendous amount of work to be done, yet we feel like there's never enough time to pull this off. So it's almost like the whole world is experiencing now the whole world is inside a Jewish person's kitchen, to a certain extent, on a Friday, where you feel like there's ChatGPT and now Vivek Ramaswamy, but 1 second, what about Ukraine? And like all these things are happening at once, and you feel like, the news cycle is changing so quickly. There's only room for like 5 seconds. So, I would hope in my own messianic outlook that like this is, in a certain sense, all of us moving towards like some sort of Kairos moment. But so you could feel this in a very regular way, which is just like every day we don't have much to do, but also from like a grander scale, which is like much is going on right now as well.
Yeah. That sounds familiar. It's in terms, I'm trying to look it up if it's Moore's law.
About
Moore's
what? About like exponentials, you mean?
like an exponential growth. He spoke specifically about like computer chips, of how the number of transistors in a computer chip doubles every 2 years. So in terms of like, so we can think about this as innovation and all this, and like we can see it in our own, with the ages of like just how like the 20th century, how much has changed in the 20th century, which is insane if you think about it.
So to those who try to count, the stress would be that's happening at like the last stretch of the 6,000 millennia, which you can also look as like the 6 days basically. And I mentioned this in the past, but we're always moving towards like the seventh day is not complete, right? We're all trying to complete that seventh day. And in a certain sense, like right, I'm seeing over here, global Shabbat prep from Nathaniel. Exactly. So we're all, I like that. We're all in the global Shabbat. We're all in the global Friday Shabbat prep mode right now. I can't make stupid comments if I join. Silly Chazi.
Well, if you still wear your mask, you might
still wear your mask. There's no silly comments. Okay, so let's continue. And the workers are lazy. So the workers clearly are not specific workers. Here we're talking about the workers, which are humans. Humans are lazy. We understand what God requires of us, but yet we still can't get ourselves off that chair and out there to do the actual work. And in a certain sense, it's sort of it's depressing in a little way, because Rabbi Tarfon is saying, like, we recognize that the day is short. Okay, we recognize that the work is much. And I'm jumping to the end. And we recognize that the reward is great. Nevertheless, the workers are lazy. Like, we can't, it's hard for us to think, look, I tell a lot of contractors I work with, think marathon, don't think sprint. Or like, don't think that this is the one job we're working together. We might be working another 5 jobs. So like, think long term. Yet it's very hard for people to be thinking that far ahead, and laziness tends to set in.
So is there any discussion about why is this the default state?
What, laziness?
Yeah, why default? Why are the poalim atzelim? Why are the workers lazy? Why are they not, like you said, if there's a lot of reward, why aren't you excited to do it? Why isn't your default to do too much work, maybe, or just to do the work? Is there any discussion about that, or any commentary on it?
We could open something up. Nothing that specifically comes to mind, but we could work that out for a second together. We could attempt to work that out together, which is, we're not, in this specific verse over here, we're not coming out and calling people out. And I think also this will continue on to the next verse over here, a chapter over here, which is, we're not dealing right now with the sinner necessarily. We're dealing with someone that is aware of all these things already. He's like the guys in the program, but he himself, it's the Mishnah here is letting you know we are aware of the human condition. I'm sorry?
The Beinoni.
Yeah, I'm saying, but also the laziness, which is, I think, part of what sometimes happens. There's so much to do that you rather just stay and lie in bed. It could be daunting. It could be scary.
Right.
And I believe this dovetails into the next verse, which is Lo alecha melacha ligmor, which we'll get to that. But basically, don't be, we've just gone through almost 3 full chapters worth of like, you got to do. And sometimes you could feel like someone says, after I realize that, then like, I can't do all this. And I understand you told me I'm going to go on the roller coaster ride, and I understand it's all great, but there's a sense where you might feel like I can't handle this, and that could lead to a laziness. And just to take it literally, I could come on a job site today, and I think it also I think, which is also why it makes Pirkei Avot and the Torah amazing. I believe it's still relevant it's even more relevant to our day-to-day life today. But I go on site and I see one of these workers just sitting down, like, doom scrolling on their phone. And it's almost, which relates back to Hamelacha Merubah. There's so much that you need to contend with. Okay, like I said, like with the news, which it really, like the fact that you have this technology today, which in one way is so great, right? But it also points out to you how the Yomas Katzar, I'm not making these apps. I'm not a programmer. I'm just going to get lost inside like this little thing right now. I'm just going to be on YouTube and I'm going to watch my shows. And I think it could be overwhelming for people. And you could even say Vasachar Harbeh, right? You could realize all you need to do is sign up for these 7 apps and you're going to have this great lifestyle, right? I mean, all you need to do is like this good living. We all know about juicing. We all see like these videos where you drink this and take that. But yet people end up finding themselves not being able to even appreciate the fruits of modern technology and modern society because they're too lost in their own ways. Let's see if there's any commentary here. Okay, maybe it's less of why the specific workers are lazy, but rather why are the humans in general lazy in this way? Why did God make us this way? Well, first of all, for sure, forget the workers. It's generally speaking about the lazy person. And I don't think it's God made us lazy. I think God is waiting for us to ante up and rise to the occasion. We're just being told that. And I also want to say, and I believe we'll touch about this later when we talk about the Tipras Surcha, where we come from in Perek Gimel, I believe. We'll scroll down there later. But it's also, in a certain extent, it is because there is still a part of us, while we have a soul and we are divine, there's a part of us that is still very natural and animalistic. And that is also going to be pulling us towards a certain direction, right? The horse doesn't want to be walking around all day. The cow wants to be chilling and eating its grass. And obviously this also relates to, it also relates to the Baal Bayit Dochek, right? The master is present. And like, we also have to realize that there's a sense, and this could again be overwhelming, that God is pressing in a sense where he's not telling you do this or do that. It's all for the taking. We all have to be participating in this, like, you have these all around you have these urgent issues. It could be global warming. It could be the meaning crisis. It could be all these things. And on all these fronts, God is pressing. God is not taking his step off the gas and telling you like, oh, take your time. So not only, and this relates back to, it's a short day. There's so much going on, and God is pressuring you to rise up to this constantly. And you're not supposed to take a step back and be like, well, again, it's too overwhelming. I'm just going to get into my lazy boy, but rather I'm going to try and, carpe diem, seize the day. I'm sorry about the Zionistic example, but that's just what's coming to my head. You could imagine that if you wanted to make a state in the religious world, let's ask these rabbis and let's ask these rabbis, and we'll have a forum and we'll see what the Orthodox say. But the master is pressing. So comes Ben Gurion and says, I'm recognizing that the day is long and I'm not going to get everything done, but we must act. So I think part of that is, again, the fact that God is pressing is in some way a response to the laziness, which is like, there might be this feel like, maybe I'll do this tomorrow. And we spoke about this. Right. So that's also because that's not a bug. It's a feature. The fact that there's not much time. And we spoke about that both like literally within your 24 hours, but also globally within the 6,000 years. And the fact that even now it's ramping up where there's so much more to do. And God is pressing. God is pressing these issues onto you and saying, like, deal with social issues, deal with economic issues, deal with political issues.
Yeah. So I think the thing that comes up, at least in my head, is this emphasis on options. The same thing about that God puts before us life and death. Those are two options. He doesn't tell us. Well, he tells us what to do, but there are still options available in there. And here as well, it's like kind of like what you said, or you can think about it like when you say sachar harbe, when you say the reward is great. There are so many different rewards that we can think of. Well, this is a reward too, like this app with the notifications, or if I run more, then that it's more enjoyable. So that's a different reward. So it's like the options are there. We just need to make sure that we understand kind of like the hierarchy of all those things, and also, like you said, move towards something.
So I think the knee-jerk reaction in these cases, as we've seen many times in Pirkei Avot, to be like that the reward is in the world to come, right? Or it's like a spiritual reward. But I think you could even say that there's actual like tangible reward that you could get from this, like, a strong community, sense of purpose. Like these are things that you could gain meaning from these things, for like emotional and like psychological benefits that are aligned with Torah values. So like the sachar harbe could be both in the world to come, but also you could gain and benefit tremendously from these methods and ways of life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I agree.
Right. So there's an urgency to engage. I think that's what we're really learning from in this verse. That's what Rabbi Tarfon is telling us, that like we need to learn, we need to act, not only do we then promise ourselves like that profound reward, both in this world and in the world to come, but it's also very much like lech lecha.
Yeah, and I think it's just incumbent on us, based on the earlier verses as well, when we say we sat down with the chachamim, with the wise people, we learned Torah, to understand, to slice the different kinds of reward and focus on the right ones, on the ones that we are talking about here, and have the right balance of those things.
Elijah asks, could the reward also be the work itself? I often find satisfaction in the job well done if I don't particularly enjoy the task. So fantastic question. And we are going to touch upon that right now. Okay. Hu haya omer. Who is Rabbi Tarfon? And when it says Hu haya omer, you know that this is one of his greatest hits, right? This is before Jacob's greatest hits. This is like when the sages had their greatest hits. So Hu haya omer. Lo alecha melacha ligmor. ולא אתה בן חורין להיבטל ממנה. אם למדת תורה הרבה, נותנים לך שכר הרבה. ונאמן הוא בעל מלאכתך שישלם לך שכר פעולתך. ודע שמתן שכרן של צדיקים לעתיד לבוא. He would also say, it is not incumbent upon you to finish the task, but neither are you free to absolve yourself from it. If you have learned much Torah, you will be greatly rewarded. And your employer is trustworthy to pay you the reward of your labors. And know that the reward of the righteous is in the world to come. This is very similar to what we were hearing from Elazar ben Arach earlier. We were also talking about like God as like as sort of the boss, and there's workers over here as well. Mm-hmm. So, and I believe this is going to relate to Elijah's point, and if not, Elijah, feel free to keep on asking. Okay, so lo alecha melacha ligmor. So I think this is already interesting. We're off the bat, we are hit with a paradox over here, right? We're coming and saying like you don't have to finish it, but you got to be learning, right? So there's like already a tension over there. So just first, Areka, lo alecha melacha ligmor. There's alecha, you, and there's this melacha, and there's ligmor. Right, so there's three different sections over here that we could sort of break this down. We could break down what we're being asked over here. So, while we're always striving to like fulfill like our duties and our obligations, we have to recognize like the human limitations that we have onto ourselves, and not only just recognizing that humans could be lazy, but we're not always going to be able to complete like the task that we have, but that doesn't exempt us from trying to do so, right? So like, when we speak to our kids and be like, at least try, or like try this new food, like you have to participate in this act. Even if you're not going to complete this act, there's what, like Elijah was saying, there's the satisfaction also of like being part of this act and trying in this act as well. There's also a sense which is a very optimistic attitude, which is it's not ending with you, right? This is very against like nihilism, which is like, buddy, there's like this story is going to continue for a long time. So you are definitely a big part of it. And you, ideally, if you could complete things, then that's fantastic. But recognize that you are completing other people's works and they're completing your work. So there's a sense over here also, which is letting you know off the bat within these two tensions, which is you need to participate as part of the continuation that you started. And you must recognize that there's going to be people after you.
Yeah.
So obviously that's very, very important to remember that. And again, in a certain way, it relieves some pressure on like the effort, like you put into the task itself instead of like the outcome. Don't only be focusing on the outcome. Like you could be learning page X and being like, okay, how am I going to be learning all these, all this tremendous amount of Torah? It's never ending. Just focus today on Pirkei Avot, second Perek, Mishnah X. Okay, be there. Don't be like, how am I finishing the next Mishnah? How am I fixing the next Mishnah? And then at the very least, appreciate the fact of your spiritual journey that you're going through just on that end. Obviously, there are, like we just said, there are other rewards, tangible rewards, like what you're doing for your community, what you're doing for yourself psychologically. But there's also just not even completing the act, but recognizing those rewards in the intentionality you put into the act itself and not necessarily the outcome that you're going to have. I think we could also look at this as, again, just like the stress on the continuous engagement, which is also, it's letting you know that in Torah, in a certain sense, you could, and this relates to lo tarashayli batel mimena. Like, in theory, it could be like, well, why can't I finish? If let's say I really finished all the books, right? I did the 5 books. I did the whole test, the whole Tanakh. I did the Talmud. I did the Mishnah. I did the commentary. I did the second levels of commentary. I did it all.
Yeah.
And Rabbi Cook talks about this, that like in theory, like with regards to the width of Torah, so to speak, you can check that box off, but you're never going to be able to check off to the depth, how deep you could go. It always goes deeper and deeper and deeper.
Yeah.
So while you should have a general plan, because in theory, this could be inviting you to be like, okay, listen, Chezi, you're telling me over here, it's really, it's all about the intentions. Elijah's enjoying starting the work, but not necessarily finishing it. And I get enough satisfaction to that. Why don't I end there? So no. Lo tarashali vatel mimena is reminding us that you should have a game plan. There should be a business plan where you're trying to say, like, I'm going to try to finish all the stuff. And the Mishnah and the Torah tells us, the Mishnah tells us, like, you should be learning Torah by age X and you should be learning Mishnah by age Y. So there could be a regiment and there could be a system to dot our I's and cross our T's, so to speak. However, again, going back to the depth is never going to be exhausted. So,
right. It's also your end goal, your perspective that changes with time. So even if you read something, you probably read it from a certain angle, looking at it. So when you're 10, when you're 13, when you're 50, when you're 20, before you have children, before you have a wife, before you lose somebody that's close to you, after you lose somebody that's close to you, those things suddenly reveal different things. It's like angles that allow you to look into the depth, maybe even deeper, maybe from a different kind of like more of
as you progress, correct. You have your place in different vantage points, and you could have a completely different understanding of what you're doing. And again, that would be like you might have read widthwise. You read all the verses with regards to that topic, right?
Yeah.
So you could be like, I'm done. But just those 10 verses could be an endless pursuit with regards to the depth and the meaning and the resonance that they have with regards to your day-to-day life. So that's like, you always have this conversation going between them. And like we did with earlier with Shabbat, when we went sort of like we zoomed out from like God's perspective. So here too, I think I don't know if it's Carl Sagan, but like there's a picture of Earth from Mars where you could just see like this little speck of light of dust that's like going through like a light beam, and like that's all we are basically. So there's a sense which is, on one hand, which is lo alecha melacha ligmor. God has a huge plan, okay? And God's plan is unfolding, whether actually scientifically speaking or seemingly scientifically speaking. This goes back to Jacob's conversation of like what is and what isn't. Either way, there is at the very least like a 13.8 billion year long story, sort of unraveling, and you could say there's like a never ending story being unraveling over here. So like we have to realize like there's much bigger plans, and recognize and know your position. You are an amalgamation of atoms and cells all together on this little speck, part of this mass universe, right? And we could even sprinkle on there the UAPs and the aliens, okay? Like lo lecha melacha ligmor, right? It could be that Alien 5 in Zorgon X, he's supposed to figure out how he travel through time, okay?
Yeah.
However, the Anatar Shali Batel Mimena, which zooms you right back in, which is like, but the glasses you should have on are, you're on Earth, it's 2023, you have to, like, you still need to deal with your life. And that's why, while there's a grand plan, focus on your personal plan, and you can't give that up. You can't feel like, oh, well, this goes back to the Modani. In the morning, you still have to wake up and say Modani and recognize, even though initially I would have been crippled by the fact that the master of the universe has created the universe. Who am I? Zoom back in and be like, God is still interested in having a conversation with you. Yes, there's a whole larger conversation happening that you'll never comprehend. But there's another conversation that you can comprehend, and that's what you are. You must continuously be active in that pursuit.
Yeah, and I think I heard this, maybe this is like I heard it from some Hasidic talk about the analogy of there might be a very large bucket that's filled with water. Maybe it's filled almost to the brim, and you might think, okay, so like, and your purpose is to fill up that bucket. The purpose of a lot of people is to fill this up. So some people might be, they might be able to carry a lot of water. So let's say they carry a water from a well and bring into this very large bucket, and they put a lot of water in, and maybe you're a little smaller and you can't carry too much. But when that bucket is almost full, and we can think about kind of like what you said, this is the 6th millennia. This is like, we're almost at the bucket is almost full. We only need a few drops. So even if you think, well, Moses or people before me were much more capable to bring Mashiach or whatever other kind of like conception of that you have, even that drop that you add to the bucket will make it full. So this is kind of like the thing that you can do to bring something great into existence. So I found that also kind of like an interesting analogy.
I like that a lot. I also just, when you gave that example of the cup overflowing, I'm forgetting what the physics term is for basically like it gets to the precipice, but you could keep on adding drops and it doesn't flow over. There's a period where like it almost like bubbles on top, but you could keep on filling it. And I would say that's another sense which like seemingly you feel like the cup is full.
Yeah.
And God is telling you like, lo alecha melacha ligmor, like believe me, like this cup of Torah, you could keep on filling it. Like the drops could keep on coming in, and you don't have to worry about it like overflowing or like it's completed. Like God had created a physical world which in theory there is still a vessel for overflow.
Yeah.
But I also really like I like that example you gave a lot. I think that was very beautiful. I'm just jumping to some comments over here. Okay, Dan. I'm behind catching up. Dialogue with Trifo. Many Jewish scholars didn't accept that Justin martyrs Trifon, the considered Trifo fictional character invented by Justin for literary purpose. Wikipedia. Okay, so not tripod. Okay, we told us lives in luxury. Trifon or Trifon Russian is a given name derived from the ancient Greek. Okay. Romanized Trifon lit, one who lives in luxury. Beseder. Okay. Hey guys, to clarify, I'm Kirk. Okay. Jacob, Kirk, I got you, young Kirk. Jacob is making me read Echoes of Glory by Rabbi Beryl Wine. I'm thinking I can be done by late October, but most of the stuff I've read so far, I've read already. Okay, keep on keeping on. I recommend Nature and Holiness by Rabbi Shirky. That's the book I push. There's many books, obviously. Although a man of wealth, he lives simply and used his money to support the needy. Who is this? Oh, he's talking about Rabbi Tarfon. Okay, nice. If there's any other insights that I misquoted or didn't realize, let me know. Chezi, are Arabs going to launch an intifada while even secular Jews in Israel are spending the whole day of Yom Kippur praying? So this is not really to our topic, just a few comments about this. One, Arabs are not going to launch an intifada. Terrorists would launch an intifada. Arabs are our cousins, and hopefully one day we'll be able to pray together. Will they even do that? Unfortunately, these terrorists are very malicious, and they have done things like that in the past, whether it's on Passover or other things like that. So, yes, that is a constant fear, one that most Israelis don't allow it to really cripple them with their day-to-day. And even secular Jews in Israel do pray on Yom Kippur. Many don't, so it's still not a monolith, but yes, it's still a heavily observed day, Kirk, on that end. By the way, at any point, you could interject and give your own commentary to these comments right now. I'm just letting you know. He 300 women during a year of drought in order that they should be able, as the wives of the priest, to eat truma. Okay, we're still talking about Rabbi Tarfon. Okay, good. We see this guy's a serious character. Every Arab is an anti-Semitic terrorist according to the modern Orthodox religious Zionists. Okay. First of all, I told you
from Pirkei Avot a little bit.
So. Right. Not according to modern Orthodox religious Zionists, according to some people in the government who see themselves as modern Orthodox religious Zionists, who are a very loud minority that happens to be in power right now. They're not all anti-Semitic, and they are part of our bloodline as well. All right, that was on that, Kirk. Relevant comments would be appreciated. Okay. Im lamata Torah harbe, im lamadata Torah harbe, אם למדת תורה הרבה, נותנים לך שכר הרבה, ונאמן הוא בעל מלאכתך שישלם לך שכר פעולתך, ודע שמתן שכרן של צדיקים לעתיד לבוא. Okay, so we're saying, regardless, you're going to get a reward. So why are we saying this? I think one is seemingly simple, which is, even though this is a must, right? We just told you that, you don't have to finish it, but by the way, you can't stop learning. Mm-hmm. But regardless, you're still going to get a reward. Okay? So, this is just to, make sure that you still feel comfortable, even though we put you in this position where you still feel like, I'm very confused. And you could read into that the reward is part, like Elijah was alluding to, the reward is in the act itself of participating in this move, or the reward is in the world to come. You're still going to get things as well. And it's also sort of asking you to push yourself. If you im lamata Torah harbe, you could come and say, what? And if I didn't learn Torah harbe, what if I just learned the regular amount of Torah? Am I just getting a regular amount of reward? And it's an invitation to excel, learn, push yourself. And I think we could also connect this a little to 2023, which is we have this amazing opportunity with the internet where we have this knowledge at our fingertips. And one could say, arguably, that Ben is taking advantage right now, right? Where he's saying, all this exists in front of me. There's all this amazing text of traditional text that I could be learning. And there's halachic implications to this. And there's changes in the modern world we live in. So all this carries an immense amount of value. And I could be tapping into this. And more than that, there's almost less of an excuse not to do so at a high level, right? Because you could say that back in Volozhin, when it's cold outside, so like, I can't, like, I'm going to be, how far am I going to pull this? Arguably, you could say like that's all you had to do is just Torah study and keep your heart warm. But my point being, in today, there's almost no excuse to come and say, where am I going to get Torah accessible to me, right? If Bill the Noahide could find a Chabad rabbi to be teaching him, then like what do we all have? Like what's our excuse? So I think here too, it's sort of like an invitation of Lamada Taharbeh. There's a lot of reward out there to get, which is again not only the reward in the world to come, but you are living today. Again, we're in the Jewish kitchen on Friday. There is so much food. There's so much an abundance of. It's so plentiful, right? And like take advantage and recognize the day is short. The day is short. ונאמן הוא בעל מלאכתך שישלם לך שכר פעולתך ודע שמתן שכרך של הצדיקים לעתיד לבוא. Okay, so here too, which is taking a step back, which we were saying all these values you could get. We are living in a society where this is both then, when this is being written, recognizing that there's Romans killing people, life is hard, children die at childbirth. You could get a sense of like, where is my reward? So first of all, it's reminding you like the reward is here to come, whether that's psychological or the Chazal actually meant it, which I'm sure they did. This is good advice to sort of delay gratification. Even more so in today's world and there could be an argument that my kids growing up today have a right to expect me to work faster than I expected my father to work, and the concept of patience to be different because we live in a much faster world. Why would it take you so long to give me that answer? Why would it take so long to order that ticket? Right. So in a sense, and this relates back to the sense of like, we're in this mode right now. The 6,000 years are coming, things are getting pushed, and you could be saying, whoa, where is my reward? Right. We're getting towards the finish line. So it's reminding you like that, this is really the time to exercise that muscle of the delayed gratification, right? It's really sort of like a counter narrative to like the modern world we live in today, which is like, just assume you're going to get these likes right away and your channel is going to explode, which is like, no, the steady horse wins the race. And while that's like a trope that's been said, even more so today, where it's reminding you, V'ne'eman ba'al melachtecha, right? He is loyal. You could trust that this is going to happen. What's curious is that there's like a focus over here of Veda shematan scharan shel tzadikim la'atid lavo. How is it written in English over here?
Reward of the righteous.
The reward of the righteous. Here they just keep it as one, but in Hebrew, matan is like matana, which is a gift, and scharan is what I deserve for what I did. Mm-hmm. So it's seemingly right. it's doubling up to a certain extent, and you could read this into, or at least what I've heard said about tzaddikim, right? Because this is also not. There's another point that they're stressing over here for the righteous, and the reason is for the righteous. They are obviously going to get their scharan, their reward that they're owed, like we were saying earlier, because they learned a lot and they studied a lot and they're righteous. However, once you hit a certain level of righteousness, then there's an addition of gifting from God, as in you're going to get all you deserve and some and more. So here there's a hint to that, which is you're getting both the matan and the sachar as well, which I think obviously here in the English translation, we miss that specific point. I want to just see if I missed anything over here. What is this? Does this have to do with us or not? So Judaism believes that in sort of I thought Rambam believed that Nazarite vow is inherently sinful as attempting to take upon obligations of temperance that are not mandatory. That's correct that the Nazarite does have to bring a sacrifice to the temple because he, like you mentioned over here, he is excluding himself from some of the amazing gifts God gave us. One of them is drinking wine, but I'm not exactly sure how that contradicts the things we were saying over here.
Yeah, I don't know if it's about like the emphasis on the study of Torah, but like we said, you take into account the fact that there are things that you need to do during the day that sustain you, and have to do with like you mentioned, like family. I mean, eating, sleeping, of course, but also taking care of your children, doing those things, and then that means that the day for the Torah is even shorter. So you need to take advantage of that.
Yeah, I like right in that we said the difference between Hazman Katzar v'Hayom Katzar, right? The Yom is putting aside all the other things that you use the day for that you had to do that are not considered Torah. Obviously, you could say that if I was teaching my son how to swim, that's also Torah study. So I get that, and I'm open to those interpretations as well. Doesn't it seem to be quite different from the Bible? For example, Leviticus 26 talks about reward in this life. Why are the rewards put off to the next life? This is more of like a historical context when this starts coming up. And this also comes out with regards to the Noahide conversation, which is like, do the Gentile righteous or do the Noahide, do they have a reward in the world to come? Do they have a portion of the world in the world to come? And this was a conversation that there are hints to this in the Bible, but this wasn't explicit. And you also have to realize in the Bible during the prophetic times, this isn't the conversation. We don't have to be philosophizing because God's will is apparent during that time. That doesn't mean everyone was living necessarily as a righteous person, but there wasn't that kind of conversation. The mindset was simpler in a certain way, which is, and there's a line about this, Masher ata shifcha, Masher ra'ayachas, like basically then what the maiden saw by the splitting of the Red Sea is greater than what Ezekiel saw. And the sense is, in a certain sense, what the maiden saw at her level of understanding was way greater and encompassing than something that's very advanced, sort of like metaphysics that Ezekiel is seeing. So even though that seemingly you could think like that is super sophisticated and in-depth understanding of let's say the nature of God, nevertheless, it's already very removed and very it's removed from Sinai in a certain respect. It's no longer God's will happening on the ground that these people from the first temple are experiencing. So they're dealing with their land, they're bringing their sacrifice, and they're not thinking about like, what's going to be in the world to come. Later on, in our history, that conversation needs to start becoming dealt with, and rabbis really start bringing that up, recognizing the social need that the people had at that time. Jacob, shalom, sir.
Shalom. Shivcha is maid servant, not maiden.
Maid servant. What did I say? Maiden? Maid servant. Yeah. I'm sorry.
Yes. I will never forgive you.
Also, I would also say just focus on Ne'eman, that we're saying that, how does it say it in English? The employer is trustworthy or loyal. I also think in today's world where you could see that you basically can't trust anyone. Politicians are corrupt. Lawyers are corrupt. The media is corrupt. So this is, again, just like you could trust the Almighty. You could trust the person, Misha Amar V'Haya Olam, the person who spoke and the world came into existence. So here too is just, it's sort of specifically in our day and age is shining a light on the fact that like those systems that we've built up, they're fleeting and they're not trustworthy.
Yeah. And I feel like those two verses are in the V'ne'emanu ba'ad. So he says it's trustworthy. And then he also tells you, and know that if you can't, it seems like it's saying that if you can't see the reward, if you can't understand how, like, where is it, then know that it will come. Right? It's almost like he's trying to reassure people even
Correct.
more. Like, it's not only trustworthy, it's also that you might not see the reward in the close future, but you will see it in the future to come.
Now, also, and just following up on where you're saying, you could also say that this is sort of like an enticement for someone to upgrade to become righteous, right? Because if you become righteous, you get to double dip, both on the deserved reward and on the gift you're getting from God.
Right.
The Seder. We now finish Perek Bet, and we move on to Perek Gimel.
Let me get there. Let's see.
I looked at this last week, and I believe it's the one with we missed those little commentaries. Akiva ben Mahala. Yeah, exactly. Again, we see our three elements over here. So, Akiva, it's not Akiva really, it's Akvia ben Mahalel, Omer. Histakel b'shlosha dvarim. My brother calls my cousin Akiva ben Mahalel. I'll explain why in a moment. Histakel b'shlosha dvarim. Ve'ein ata ba li'edei avera. Da ma'ayin bata. Ule'an ata olech. ולפני מי אתה עתיד לתת דין וחשבון? מאין באת? מטיפה סרוחה. ולאן אתה הולך? למקום עפר, רימה ותולעה. ותולעת? תולעת. ולפני מי אתה עתיד לתת דין וחשבון? לפני מלך מלכי המלכים, הקדוש ברוך הוא. Kavya, the son of Mahalal, would say, reflect upon these three things and you will not come to the hands of transgression. Know from where you came, where you are going, and before who you are destined to give a judgment and accounting. From where you came, from a putrid drop, where you are going to place of dust, maggots, and worms, and before whom you are destined to give judgment and accounting before the Supreme King of Kings, the Holy One. Blessed be He.
So okay. I just want to say a comment before you go into it.
Say many comments.
So when I read this for the first time, not that while ago, so I was trying to explain to my wife too, like what I was reading, and I was telling her that this is kind of like the Tao Te Ching, but it's very Jewish, obviously, and like this is one of the pieces where I was like. It kind of was like, it starts with like, reflect upon the things you will not come. It starts very kind of like pithy, kind of like the Tao Te Ching as well. But then it gives you all these specific words. It goes into this, you're coming from a putrid drop and maggots and worms. And there's a few other places in here that it's very it's very earthly in a way. And I would say that I feel like that is very Jewish in the way that how it's both spiritual and very specific and earthly at the same time. And this is kind of the thing that really kind of shook me or was very unique to me, or like was. Came up to me when I was reading it for the first time, that I was like, it was all these things at the same time, and I was kind of like confused by it.
Well, I think you are intuitively tapping into something that Akavya ben Mahalel is doing over here, because he seemingly is repeating himself, right? He just said, and then again he tells us each one and gives a breakdown. Right. And there's an interpretation that one is talking about the soul, and one is talking about, let's say, earthly understandings of how those things manifest. So there is that split already built into that. And it's saying like, well, before we jump into that, let's talk who the character we're talking about over here. So he also, he's not in Yavne, he's in Jerusalem. He's a big shot there during the Second Temple. And the reason he was a big shot, and this is why my brother calls my cousin this, is because he had his own traditions, and he had his own traditions from his own rabbis. And even though the majority of rabbis did not agree with him, he really couldn't care. And he really did. I don't want to say he couldn't care. He really did his own thing. and he was known for doing that. I believe also there's some evidence that he even was exiled. He had to go through nidui, excommunicated basically, because of this attitude. Having said that, with his son, he makes sure his son does follow the majority of rabbis. And the reason he said so is because he said, I myself heard from a majority of other rabbis that agree with why I do the things the way I do. So I didn't have that tension, even though there's this other majority of rabbis saying X, because I had my own majority, so I could do my own thing. However, my son did not hear from those rabbis, and that's why he has to toe the line with regards to the classic majority. What else did he have? I think he was also fairly harsh as well, like the way he would speak. If I recall correctly, he would call, is this him? I think it's him. Anyone in the comments could correct me. But like weak students, it's also not very PC. He would call them Bnei Torah, the son of Torah. This is Abraham's concubine, basically. Right? Mm-hmm. So like that was his diss. All right, so let's dive in. Histakel b'shlosha dvarim ve'ein ata ba lidei avera. Right? So on a surface level, focus on these three things, and you're not going to have to deal with sin. It's interesting also that they emphasize this in the English I see over here, that don't come to the hands of transgression, right? And because you could just say anatabale avera, right? Or you're going to have a transgression. And here it's a little hint where Akvia is recognizing, and you mentioned this earlier, that God is giving you an evil inclination and a good inclination, but even the evil inclination isn't in its essence evil. It only becomes evil if it manifests and comes, like how it says, comes to hands of transgression, right? Like it actually gets the motivation and manifests with yadayim, hands, to actually do those acts. So having ideas or contemplating, like dealing with your yetzer, or this inclination, isn't within itself a problem. It's really how it manifests itself. So here it's just giving you showing that it's not just the thought process. It's actually, it came through these actions as well. And this is a general call for real introspection and existential reflection that he's inviting you to really do over here. Like you were saying, it seems like there's this holy place, and he's telling where there's the hustle and bustle of the world. And I'm really asking you right now to ask these real fundamental questions. And he gives now a breakdown of where this is coming from. And I'm just, because I'm sort of doing this sort of freehand, I'm going to try to weave in some of the things you were talking about, these differences between these two versions of just, we're talking to someone on one level, and then we're talking to someone on a practical level as well.
Yeah.
So you come from a tipas srucha. You're coming from this drop. So off the bat, you could look at this in two ways. You could look at this generally saying that this is there to humble yourself, right? Doesn't matter if you're Jeff Bezos or you're the big shot. Ultimately, you're coming from this little drop of semen, and you should recognize your position and who you are, right? So this is a very pushing you sort of right down into this place. And it's also sort of a response to the atheist in a certain way. Where am I coming from? You should recognize this is all coming from God. You're coming from this place right now of this tipas rucha. Know where you come from. On the other hand, on the higher level, there's people that interpret this me'ain bata me'ain. You come from in the mystical term, the Ein Sof, right? You're coming from God himself. And that's coming from a really high point of recognition, no longer from this little drop, but rather I'm coming from God's will, right? So this is a much higher spiritual understanding of it. At the same time, we have then this tipas rucha, right? So we're talking to two people at the same time. We're talking to the person that's just asking the question, who am I? Where do I come from? To you, who's asking this deep question, I answer, you come from the Ein, right? Now we'll bring it down. This guy walks in and says where do I come from? I'm the man. Whoa. Slow your roll. You come from a little drop. Okay, so those are two levels of conversation that you're having. And me'ayin bata, and which is also it's sort of, you have to recognize like what is your purpose, like what are you doing, where like what's really happening over here, and there's a sense, there's a story that Rav Nachman gives. It's a very long story. It's about the 7 beggars, and one second. Jonathan, how are you? We're so happy to have you over here. I'm going to be talking to Jonathan a little after we finish. Like we'll end at this Mishnah, and then the conversation will continue, and all are welcome to join. But we'll just continue where we are right now. So there's a story of 7 beggars that Rav Nachman gives. Really, it's a story within a story. It's there's like, I don't know, like 50 pages worth of in Rav Nachman's works about these 7 beggars. But in one, and each one breaks down to small little stories. But in one of these stories, these 7 beggars get lost at sea, and they make it to this little island. And then the island, they go to the top of the tower, and they decide to have a memory test, like a competition. And obviously, this is all very symbolic. And the great eagle, who's going to judge them? It's the great eagle who's going to judge them, which the Kabbalists usually see the eagle as symbolizing tshuva, repentance. But so one of them, the older one, says, like, I remember when the fruit was picked. Mm-hmm. And then another one that's younger says, I remember when the fruit grew. And one says, I remember when the seed was planted. And these are all analogies for basically childbirth in a certain extent. Like, I remember the conception. I remember like being picking the fruit is giving birth. And the youngest one comes and says, I don't remember. And comes the eagle and says like this is the guy, he won. He has the best memory, because we sort of are born into a world where there's sort of like these defaults. We see the people, we roll with the punches. Very quickly, I'm trying to indoctrinate my son with the ways of the Western world and the Torah world. But like either way, and in a sense, there's never a question where it's like, wait, but like how far back can I actually go? Where am I coming from? So This is a sense of like he who doesn't remember, or he who recognizes that even before that first, even if I could even remember my conception, even before that, there was something. And this is bringing me back to the ain. Like there is something that I'm coming from. I am part of God's will manifest into this world. So there's like a sense over here where, again, there's like a very deep question that we're asking over here of like, me'ayin bata, where are you coming from?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this kind of like reminds me of kind of like this admission of ignorance, especially the way Socrates talks about it. Talks about wisdom, but it's also about where you're coming from. It's like the admission of ignorance, at least from your own perspective, of like how far back, how deep it goes, that I can't. It's something that cannot be remembered, cannot be named. And I think admitting that, I think it's part of what's very hard for people.
For sure. And there's a lot of psychological literature about this of like, like obviously like people have a lot of stress and anxiety about like their origin story, where they come, and does this mean that's what defines you? I would also point out that this also connects to what we were saying earlier about lo alecha melacha ligmor, and you can't stop and you can't stop studying either, as in like you don't have to complete the work or the study, but you can't refrain from it. And this also reminds you, which is like damein bata, recognize where you came from and all the people that did the work before you, and recognize where you're going, how the work has to continue. Right? So like you didn't start this march and you're not going to end this march, which is also just putting things into perspective.
Yeah.
Le'ana ta'olech is, again, we could answer this at 2 levels. Where are you going? Talking to the guy that's saying, listen, I've accumulated all these assets. I have all these things. Buddy, you're going to be left alone. It's just going to be you and the worms and nothing else, and no prized possessions. We've mentioned this in the past, that Sheldon Adelson was buried in Israel during Corona. It's just him and his wife She has like this little jacket on. No one is there. And this is like the super powerful rich man. You're left alone in the end. So this is when we're going back and now directly talking to the person that's like bucking up against this or not recognizing who he is. On the higher level, le'an is very much like le'ain. Me'ain bata u'le'an ata olech. You came from the ain and you're returning to the ain. Mm-hmm. Ultimately, in the grand scheme, you are coming from God's will manifest, and you are ultimately hoping to connect and become one again with God's will manifest. And they're, again, bringing you back to this, having the conversation at a higher, more intellectual, spiritual level, and not the person that's bucking up against the system. So
I just want to make a comment that this is very, in a way, and I think Sachs also talks about this in the book. In a way, this
Sachs is your boy.
Sachs. Rabbi Sachs, yeah. Lord Rabbi Sachs. He talks about this in the book where he says this is so, in a way, this is so similar to, I think you mentioned Carl Sagan talking about this, like one of the atheist approach in terms of like we're from nothingness, we are nothing, we come from nothing, we're just dust, and we'll go back to nothing. And this is what they say. And here as well, if you read this, it says Ayin, which you say is God, is the infinite light, but it's also, in a way, Ayin, like nothingness. But our idea of nothingness is very different than the idea of nothingness that the atheists would have. So it's
nothingness is more like, goes back to Tov Avo, right? It's
chaos,
it comes potential.
Yeah, you have the potential and the conception of God behind that, or somehow is that, but it's just something that we cannot speak about. So that's why it's Ayin, I imagine. But to me, it's just interesting that those are similar. It's like similar conceptions, similar workflows that both the atheist and the religious would have, but there's just the conception of what nothingness is and what that is related to, or what is behind that nothingness, is very different. So that's where it's very different, even though the moves are kind of like similar. And that's I was saying that Rabbi Sachs is doing something similar because he takes a quote from somebody that goes over something, and he just replaces that quote. Instead of saying how sorrowful it is that we come from nothingness, he says how beautiful it is that we come from God. And then the whole quote is just it still stands by itself, even though you just switch those two things. So
I think atheists, it requires a tremendous amount of faith. Right, we're both knocking up at the same door from different perspectives.
Mm-hmm. So the ends of a spectrum,
correct,
that are very, very close. That if it's around it, it's like very close together.
Right. So I would say that you almost need to get to the place where, and we mentioned this in the past, how one needs to go through the 50 or the 80 levels of heresy before he comes out of the other end. And during that time, you could be defining nothingness as like the atheist is, and it takes a while till you recognize there's like a deeper level to this nothingness, so to speak.
Right.
Right. So, I mean, generally speaking, I mean, like on a simple level, also, obviously this is talking about the forgo the focus on material things that we were talking about. Right, so there's a few things that they're doing over here, which is, first of all, which is interesting. We're giving two different people over here. Melech Melchei Melchim, the King of Kings, the Holy One, blessed be He. Right, so there's a lot of names that we have over here that we're giving, and to recognize Baruch Hu, blessed be He, that's not a biblical term. And here too, we're seeing two different differences. We're seeing the Holy One, and this relates to holy, 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 right? Which is it's distant. You're never going to be able to connect it. It's transcendental. It's out there. But then there's also blessed be He. However, blessed be He is us taking something mundane and blessing it, and then raising it up, basically. But that's only something that comes after prophecy, because during prophecy, God's will is like we are hearing about God's will through the prophet, basically. So we're only getting the top down. We're only getting the holy. And we spoke about this. We spoke about this a little we gave the example of Tefillah and Shema, right? That Shema is coming from Moses, but that's really top down. And Tefillah is coming from the prophets, and that's bottom up, how we relate back. So here too, we're sort of we are defining God in these two different ways, both from the top and from the bottom, and recognizing this. And this too is, like we said, the conversation we had. We had this high level conversation of Me'ayin Bata, I'm coming from the Ain, and that is very much my conversation with the Holy One, the King of Kings. However, when I'm having the conversation about the Tipas Rucha and the drop, and I'm having the conversation about the material things and what I'm going to be buried in, that's when I need to recognize blessed be he. That's where I need to recognize that these mundane earthly things, I need to elevate them and sanctify these things, so to speak, as well. There's also a sense over here, which is ulifnei mi ata atili tadin v'cheshbon, and you can read it ulifnei mi, and you're going to stop over there. Ata atili tadin v'cheshbon, me, which is instead of ma, not a what, but a who. Recognize that you are a who, and this goes back to modeh ani. Recognize that you're an ani, you're a me, and not a me like as in English, even though that also works, but I mean like a me and not a ma. You're a someone and not a something. And ultimately, and this relates to Avram, like lech lecha, go deep into yourself. Ultimately, or the famous story of Zusha. What are we going to ask about Zusha? Why wasn't I like this guy? Why wasn't I like that guy? They're going to ask me, why were you not more like Zusha? Why were you not more like me? Recognize that ultimately you're also going to be speaking to yourself, and you're going to be seeing yourself, and you're going to have to realize that you didn't live up to your full potential.
Interesting.
And on that note, I think we'll continue with Chelek Bet, with Mishnah Bet next week.
Yes, Mishnah Bet. Yeah, chapter 3.
Sgan HaKohanim, the deputy of the Kohanim. Before I move on, Jacob, you have anything you would like to share with us?
Yes. When you guys finish, we're going to have a siyum.
When we're finished all of it, yeah, we could have a siyum.
Rav Ovadia Yosef says you can make a siyum even on a single chapter of Pirkei Avot.
I don't know if I told this story before about Tisha B'Av. This is in no way a tooting my own horn statement right now. It's just relevant to this conversation. But needless to say, throughout my career, my yeshiva career of study, I have completed many masachtot.
Have you made a siyum on Gans Shas?
So.
Wow!
However, I never, because I did it in a way that I don't think was real in-depth learning, and I didn't want to give myself that celebration of doing.
I will take 0 shiftless from you. Okay. You made a siyum on Gans Shas, and if you didn't actually make the siyum, then we need to make the siyum, because it is absolutely horrible of you to denigrate such an accomplishment with your Gaivadik shiftless.
This sounds basically, you quoted, that was basically what my mom said. Either way,
and so Kibud Avayim also you were over upon.
So
you're such a horrible person, Chezi.
During one of these summer camps where I was a counselor, there was someone that was with me in the study hall as well. And during the 9 days, we don't eat meat. Yeah. However, the camp really wanted to eat meat. All the campers wanted to eat meat. And then my friend said, you know who could do a siyum every night? Chezi can. And then we just wasted them away on kids that I don't even know if they knew Aramaic or what was going on. And then it was sad that I wasted like, I don't know, 7 of those siyums or 6 of those siyums on spoiled brats. Okay. I just want to catch any other lines that I might have missed. Questions, other fathers, laws, or suggestions. Jacob, I'm going to let you take that.
So the Ethics of the Fathers, at least the first 4 chapters, are parts of the Mishnah, and each teaching of the Mishnah is, in essence, a law. It's not a suggestion. And what is especially important about the Mishnah in Avot is that it is the summation of the entirety of Torah by the person who taught it. So each Mishnah is, in a very real sense, a summation of the entirety of the Torah.
Thank you, Jacob. Okay. And Trey, I'm not sure. Okay, I'm kind of liking this. I'm down with this. I'm not sure what you're talking about, but I'm going to decide you're talking about becoming a no-hide. And Craig, I'm also down for that. Okay, so this conversation specifically, and it could go in a just chatting fashion. It could go anywhere. But I wanted to discuss a little. I heard a fantastic conversation that Jonathan was having with Bill and Trey, followed with a conversation that Jacob, Trey, and Andrew and I were having. And if you don't mind sharing just a little, like I was hearing your conversation and I felt very inspired. And this goes along with also Rabbi Malot having his video and his little thing with Bill, and Jacob showing us that, or Sameach Rabbi talking about the no-hide movement as well. And I think you know this, but just to be clear, like this is not something that is like being talked about all the time, unfortunately.
Right.
And there was a sense of urgency in hearing Rabbi Malot. And on the other hand, on the other side, I hear you saying like, I just believe something like, this is like, I'm an early adapter, basically. Like this is like the wave. So first of all, like I salute you for that mindset. And I don't know if we recognize enough in this little corner how difficult that is, obviously. And I recognize how difficult it is for Sam being a Unitarian, and how difficult it is for Trey being a JW and in his own journey. So like, and clearly in this, as Paul has discussed in the past, like, you know, this little island of misfits. So we're aware of that. But within that group, there's like another little group, the Copts. No, not the Copts. There's another little group, which is these no-hides. And you have to deal with that both from Trey, and you have to deal with that sort of from the Jews saying like, who are you? And like, what is this? And I could forget myself sometimes while I'm having this like lovely conversation with you, that anytime I talk about this with someone else, they're like, and these are, you know, Orthodox Jews that are clever people. They, you know, I'm falling off the moon right now. They're like, yeah, I sort of heard something about this like once, but like, what are you talking about? Is this a real movement? Are those people? So, and I've heard you mention before, like, oh, it became real, the real, when you're mentioning like, well, my wife is on this part of her journey, and there's my kids, and there's like how that's actually working out. So I guess I'm really interested to sort of know like, what is, if I could ask, what is the game plan? How do you look at this? And just to make, which I hope is known, and I'm sure Jacob has done this, like, this is an open arms invitation to utilize me, ask, see if there's something you want me, like, so if in any way I could be helpful in that, I would be glad to.
No, thanks. I appreciate that. I think a couple of like, what's the plan? there is no plan, but I don't mean that in terms of like I'm throwing my hands up and saying there's no plan, but I think I'm trying to put a plan together, and it's not easy, to your point about, it ain't easy being in Noahide, but it's not keeping me up at night or anything either. So it's like I don't want to like overplay that for me. I think that there's maybe two aspects of it that are kind of in play. One is like the family dynamic, right? So I find myself married with children and having a, maybe not the classic conversion experience, but changing my mind and changing my beliefs on something. And you can't force necessarily, at all, other people to change their minds and opinions. So you've got that dynamic playing out just internally, even setting aside like Noahide community, but just like, I'm not a single person that only is responsible for my own decisions in a vacuum, right? So there's that aspect. I think on the other side of it too, it's like even if there were no family considerations, like what is the path forward for a Noahide to get integrated into, I guess, the Jewish community? Like what is the way that works? And I've heard the expression "make yourself a rabbi," right? Does that apply to Noahides? And should a Noahide yeah. So and so like Jacob jokes about not being a rabbi himself, which I take him at face value, but he's also very knowledgeable and sufficiently knowledgeable to to teach, I think, at least the super ignorant among us, and has done so. But yeah, like what would be, but do I want to go knock on the door of the local rabbi at the Chabad house and say, okay, well, you presumably live near me, right? Can you have an internet rabbi, so to speak? Is that a good idea, even if it's, maybe allowed? Like, is it ideal? So I think there's like a lot of practical, questions that I think could probably be taken in aggregate to become the shape of a playbook for kind of the abstract Noahide, right? Like it's not so much tailored to me in my specific experience. Like there is that aspect, right? But I think that, there's enough, there are enough questions out there that have probably precise answers that just need to be compiled somewhere. Like the Complete Idiot's Guide to Being a Noahide, or Noahides for Dummies, or that kind of thing. What are you holding up there?
This.
Shalom.
That is a book which attempted. So let me just say one thing about internet rabbis. Judaism, unlike a lot of religions, is very not binary. So we have lechatchila, which is that which is ideal, and we have b'diavad, which is that which is practical. And lechatchila, you should have a rabbi who lives near you and who knows your family and knows your community and knows you well. But not everybody lives in a lechatchila situation. A lot of us live in a very b'diavad situation, in a situation where things aren't how they should be. And I mean, so you make do with what you make do, and you have a certain amount of faith in God that, I mean, the Mishnah they were talking about earlier today really speaks to me. Lo alecha hamalacha ligmor. You don't have to finish the work. That doesn't mean you're free to desist from it. So it's very much in the middle, right? It's not a binary. It's not a this works, this doesn't work, or I'm going to heaven, I'm going to hell, right? We don't have a I'm going to heaven or I'm going to hell in Judaism. We have we're all going to heaven. Some of us are going to work harder and accomplish more, and some of us were given more capacity. From those to whom much has been given, much will be required. And ultimately, we trust that God's judgment is a lot better and smarter and merciful and just than anything we can actually comprehend ourselves.
I would say that in a certain sense it's broken down to like I'm trying to figure out what I want to do as a Noahide. There's like the bare minimum of like, okay, now I'm a Noahide. Now what? And I would say no, there's how do I pull off being like, being a Noahide with all the specific requirements I need for the kind of life I live. Then there is sort of, okay, like I'm a registered Noahide, like what does that mean for my surroundings? And then there's, okay, how do I expand this? How do I take this further? How do I become a community? Where do I take this journey of becoming a Noahide? And you really are, like Rabbi Malot says, you're on the front lines, both literally and spiritually. You are sort of on uncharted waters. And even for people like Jacob and I, to us, in some ways, it's sort of miraculous because we're like, wow, like this is happening, like having a conversation like this with you. On the other hand, it's daunting because like, what can we offer you? Like, there's kind words and there's good ideas and like, there's practical answers for, but guys, how do I go to church now with my wife? And then I could like read out to you like an answer of like, well, 1, 2, 3, you do it for this reason. And so this little book over here gives you those answers. However, how do you cultivate that into something greater? And even in this book, then there's another conversation where it's like, okay, now that I'm this Noahide guy, does that eventually turn into me wanting to study more and observe more and do more? And like, besides from like a very small amount of stuff, like tefillin and other things that I can't do, or like, or write a mezuzah, there's many things like, which I mentioned before, like even the Sabbath, like, is that something that I want to take on? Or is that too strange? Or, and that happens sort of in levels, which is like, that would be something ideal to do, but I'm not ready to do that without a community. And also having the mindset, which is being okay with that, which is not, and I'm not trying to throw any shade, but like Trey's mentioning that it would mention like, okay, like Noahides are just getting the crumbs basically. Like, the Jews are like the rock stars and like, here you go, like here are a few other options. And I like going back to that example of that, like, you could get to the place of the high priest. And that is really an invitation in a certain way to all people on earth, which is God is asking all of those people to orient themselves properly towards them. Now, there's a distinction between someone that fully sees himself. How is it written over here? And there are those who distinguish between a non-Jew who did not take upon himself the 7 Noahide laws, who would be limited, as stated in his study, studying only things that regard to the Noahide or like theological studies, and a proper Noahide who was permitted to learn the entire Torah. And then the question is also, where do you find yourself? Where you, and this is a real question for yourself, because in a sense, I could go back to the belief that an individual or a nation is being led by some power, whether physical or spiritual, which exists on a lower level than the all-encompassing creator, is not prohibited as long as no worship is associated with that belief. Right? So now, I don't have that. You have that as an option. And is that somewhere where you want to now, I want to ride on that for the next 20 years? Or am I riding on that now because I need that for the next 10 years, but I want to then move to a next level where like, I don't need that loophole. I want to be like done with that. And that sort of relates to the question you said, like, but my wife still wants to go to that. And how is that introduced to her in a way which is not telling her like, Well, you could do like the kiddie version of it, but really tell her like you should recognize that in our movement, and God recognizes this, that things are complicated. There are concepts like lower powers that we still need to contend with. And if at this point of your journey,
okay, Chezi, enough speechifying. Jonathan, do you want to say something?
No, this is helpful. I appreciate the speechification. I had to listen to it again, but the rabbi at Or Sameach who delivered that.
I have to say, Rabbi Reisman is not, well, being just an Or Sameach rabbi is still a prominent position in Orthodox Judaism. But he was a guest lecturer there. He's a Rosh Yeshiva at Torah V'Dat. He is one of the leaders of Orthodox Judaism.
Yeah, and from what I remember hearing, he distinguishes between sort of an official Noahide, and I think he was actually talking about a Ger Toshav, yeah?
Yeah,
as like an official Noahide, like those were equivalent in his.
Well, so what he was saying is every Gentile should be a Noahide.
Mm-hmm.
It is incumbent upon him, but somebody who goes before a rabbinic court and accepts it upon himself. So he very specifically, I guess it was the Tosfot Yom Tov. Or it was a Ritva he was quoting. I think it was the Beis Halevi who's teaching a Ritva, which is that a Gentile who accepts upon himself the status of a Ger Toshav, even if he doesn't actually do it his entire, like he's not capable. Even if he makes mistakes and he falls because of his tava, because of his literally lusts, falls into sin, he's still he would say a completely higher level of as a person than somebody who understands you shouldn't steal and doesn't steal, but he doesn't do it because he believes in God and he believes that Torah is true.
Wasn't that the Rambam stipulation though
that's the Rambam
Gentile
stipulation? Not all though. Not everyone agrees with that, but the Rambam agrees with that.
Well, Jacob was just talking about higher status. Rambam actually says Gentiles have a place in the world to come if they follow those laws.
Because of Moses.
If they follow those laws because it was commanded by Moses.
Right. So I would put myself in that camp. I haven't officially told it, gone before. Maybe if Ben were a rabbi, we could have done it a second ago. But I would say that's the distinction, and but it's kind of a mysterious distinction, right? Because it's based on sort of my motive and belief.
It's between you and God, ultimately, Jonathan.
Right. And just to say, some would say that even if it's coming from just because you think it's the moral thing to do, people that disagree with the Rambam will say you're still in the clear. You're all still good. You're still part of the, you're in it. It's very important for Maimonides specifically, and I mentioned this in the morning, and there could be that there's an element over here which is also a response to Christianity, which is you're doing this not because it's the right thing or it's the proper thing to do, but really because of the yoke that God gave you, that you're doing this because you have to be doing this. But obviously that's a broader discussion. And I mean, I'm looking over here at a comment that Elijah's saying, that this is just talk. I mean, I don't, and some of the services I could offer is if there are, and I preface this by saying, you should identify a rabbi, right? And there should be someone that you're using that is an actual authority. However, if there are questions, don't feel like you're just checking it on ChatGPT or speaking out to the dark. I will gladly discuss a question with you. We could go into the sources with regards why yes, why no, and then just learn that little section and discuss that little section. So at the very least, feel like you have a chavruta or someone that you could dive into this. And by all means, feel free to then speak to that rabbi. And for all I know, maybe I'm wrong, and he'll say that's not relevant, or knowing your specific position, you should do X, Y, Z. But there is, like I'm saying, when I hold this up, it's because there are people doing work to manifest these things and to do these things. And there's a prayer book that he makes as well, which is also just like, for the Noahide and how to pray and how to do this. So I believe that this is a very practical conversation. And like you just said, as far as being an early adopter, very much like a field of dreams. If you build it, they will come, right? If everyone's waiting for like one big Noahide guy that like is a great speaker, I don't know, maybe he'll come. Maybe Jordan Peterson will change his ways and decide that that this is the route. But
Chezi, or you could go take a few of those exams with the Rabbanut.
So part of my discussion with Rabbi Shirky is I want to see if I could, at the very least, become a more official part of his movement and funnel people towards that, like through an English, an English prism and not French or Hebrew.
But you could paskin for people who have real questions in their own lives.
There are real answers, and and this is not like a picking and choosing. However, even within people that are interpreting the Noahide laws, there are some that are more lenient, there are some that are more liberal, there are some that are more conservative. And there too, one has to be conscious of, if I heard answer X from this rabbi, and I know that this is going to be devastating to my wife, there too, you have to start thinking about, like, is this position the only position I could take upon this, or is this
Chezi, what does the Mishnah say? Aseh lecha rav, so that what?
Ukna lecha chaver.
No. Aseh lecha rav.
Yes.
Tistakel min safek.
Safek, yes. Find yourself a rabbi and avoid doubt. And
all you're doing is introducing doubt because you don't believe in a poskin, in a posek who actually poskins and says, this is it. No, you don't have to go look at 10 different rabbis and decide between them. I'm
Jacob,
not just giving you a billion choices. I'm actually going to poskin.
So we'll take a live example, okay? A Noahide who is forced to engage in idol worship or is likely to be endangered for refusing to do so is permitted to participate, and is not obligated to give up his life to avoid idol worship, right? So someone could come and tell you, if you're forced to engage in idol worship or if it's endangered, but like your wife's saying she wants to go, or just because you had like a financial loss over there, that's not considered. However, there are those in their reading of the Ramban in the Mishnah Torah hold that even where financial loss is threatened, leniency is advised, right? So you could get one answer, which will mean you respond to someone X, and there could be another answer. And all I'm telling Jonathan is over here is because he's in a dynamic where there are kids and there's a wife, and there's a wife that might be where, she could be 2 years behind. So the question there would be, maybe for Jonathan, he wants number one, and for her, it's number two, and they're still within the rubric. And the reason, I don't want to give you any doubt. My point is, you are on the front lines right now, and you are also dealing with something that you hear both Rabbi Malot and the other rabbi discussing, that people don't really know how to react to this. Don't come to my community. Don't be in my synagogue. And you'd be like, well, what do you mean? But it says in the book that you can. I never read that book, and I'm very nervous about anyone that sort of smells like a Christian or looks like a Christian coming into my synagogue, so to speak. So Jacob, I totally hear what you're saying, and I'll reiterate. I'm not saying you should be going picking and choosing. My point, I'm letting you know that when picking a rabbi, you should do so carefully.
It's not about, but I'm not making the point about Jonathan. I'm making the point about you, Chezi.
Yes. Well, let's take a step back, Jonathan. Did you hear me?
Let's hold on. Let's put. If you don't mind, Jonathan, for a second. Let's put Jonathan to the side. It's not about Jonathan. It's about the fact that when somebody comes to you, Chezi,
Yes.
and says, Rabbi Chezi, who has been through Gans Shas and has lived halacha his entire life, and who davens 3 times a day, and who has this kahuna and this position of being a Levite who knows what God wants better than I do. This is the situation. I want a psak din. You personally don't feel that it's your place to paskin and to say that this is the will of God because I study Torah and I learned from the Torah how to paskin, and I am making a psak din.
Okay, but how am I creating doubt?
Because you refuse to make a psak din.
Oh, okay. I understand. I don't know how to respond to that. I guess I'm trying to avoid what sometimes happens when people convert, is that they feel like it's either all or nothing. And what I'm saying is specifically, there is a unique scenario with nohais, which is it's not all or nothing. There's a threshold, and then it's sort of the more you want to participate and the more authentic you are about it, the more you are invited to participate. But that could be scary if you come about it saying like, I want to participate full Monty, and your wife is not there yet. And I believe that on the ground today, there are many rabbis that might not be sensitive enough to give you that option or break it down that way. And just to Jacob's point, and that is why I am actively trying to see if I could get more affiliated, like officially, with like this Brit Olam movement. And on my own hand, need more guidance, right? It could be that like I talk about these topics and I'm aware of these topics with a lot of confidence, but perhaps I'm misrepresenting and perhaps I'm misunderstanding because this isn't like my bread and butter. It's like I do every day. So like I also need to be cautious on that end. However, I do when I hear you say something like, you know, I don't know, like she still wants to go to church and we're going to see, I want to tell you like, hey, like, well, we're with you. You don't have to like, let's talk it out and let's see how we carve this out for you, where you don't have to feel like I'm just sort of going about this alone. Obviously you're not alone because God is by your side. But yeah. And what is Elijah ripping me about right now? Mother Jacob is angry that Chezi isn't living up to his potential. Okay, sure. And Chezi looking down was the cherry on the top. Okay. So do you think, Jonathan, from what I said, that I was creating more doubt?
No. And I mean, I don't know that. So I will say that like the church thing is complicated because it's not necessarily a theological impetus. It's more community, which is sort of a bummer because I'm probably not going to find that ready-made on the, you know, we can't go to the Noahide church. So it's almost like worse than the theological one because that's like a, you know, you can change your mind on something like that, but like you can't replace a need with something that doesn't exist. So, you know, it's possible for us to get the community and for me to just, you know, cross my fingers behind my back or whatever I need to do, you know, in that context. So I'm not, it's not that I like flat out refuse to go into a church. I'm not like, I don't have some kind of it's not, I'm trying not to make it about like my own setting the rules up for myself. If I'm told like, hey, it's okay, you could do this, right? If a rabbi tells me like, if my rabbi says, no, this is okay for you, you can do this, right? Just, don't pay attention or whatever it is, right? Okay, right. Sure. That's fine. Like, I'm not going to make it about me where I'm like, no, I'm, Moshe in my own play, and I've decided that this is not for me, right? Like, I'm willing to subject myself to an authority on this, right? It didn't really cross my mind that like I'd go meet a rabbi who'd be like, oh yeah, you can never step foot in the church again. I mean, maybe that would happen. But I think from what I understand, there are probably higher considerations that a rabbi would like take into account, like my relationship with my wife and my family, right? So
there are rabbis and there are rabbis, and there's also differences like, and for example, I'm not well versed enough in this, and like Jacob in many ways are, like there are differences obviously within the churches and with like, so, and if a rabbi's not aware of that, he'd be like, no, this is wrong. He'd be like, well, let me tell you about this church first, and let me tell you what it looks inside, and the fact that there's no icons inside, so like maybe it's not such a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and sometimes you're not aware to give that kind of information to the rabbi because you're not studying, you're not aware of like what the requirements sort of necessarily are. I also want to mention over here to Elijah, just be Protestants with your little book and your little prayer book. Jewish, Gentiles, and total exile is what we give you. So I don't think it's what we give you. It's what you make for yourself. And the invitation, and more so to Elijah, you're in your little room reading your books all day. And clearly you love what our wisdom has to teach. So like, this is someone that's walking the walk. You are in the room. And he's not going to be in exile alone if you get off from your room and you start living the thing that you are clearly very, very, very connected to, being drawn to, right? You are spending your time watching 3 Jews and a Noahide talk. You could be doing anything else, buddy. But you should ask yourself how you are still part in this conversation. And then, and this would be true to all Ba'ei Olam, all those people that want to be calling out God's name in one accord, right? So, and I'm putting Christians aside right now because like, they're in their beliefs. So the people with doubts, right? So you could be an atheist, you could be an agnostic, or you could do this. And it's not like I'm giving you the exile. I'm telling you, come home. And maybe I'm wrong, but I would think, like, would it be so nuts for maybe it is so nuts, but like the Noahide community to connect itself to a Jewish community? Obviously you have to find the right community to do that with, but be like, it's, it's better than nothing. There's many things that we're aligned with. That doesn't necessarily mean I need to go to all their services, prayers. It doesn't mean I have to participate in everything, but I could slowly get involved. And for yourself, you would have to realize like where that line is, which is you're telling yourself, I'm okay not needing to convert because that's not what I'm supposed to be doing. And that's not what, if I want to, then great, but that's not something I have to do. And people should feel confident to be like, I'm not giving you Jewish, Gentile, and exile. I'm giving you the Gentile that could reach a higher level than the high priest. That's what I'm giving you. That's the option. And it's for the taking. And unfortunately, and why it's so amazing for us is because unlike a convert, it's in a certain way to me is like you're seeing even more than them because you recognize your position and don't feel the need to be like, then I need to turn it into something else. Rather, I need to open up my eyes and start having the conversation for the first time. And so, yeah, so on what Elijah's saying over here, more power to you. You're not alone and you're not in exile. If anything, you're finally returning to the promised land. What did I write? Oh, you wrote that. I'm like, because you're a 6'4" young man. I'm like, when did I write that? Okay. Does your wife still believe in Jesus? You don't have to answer that question, obviously, if you don't feel comfortable.
You'd have to ask her.
If you can't find, and then it would be like, what does that mean by Jesus? Who says you can't find community in church. If you told me in a Jewish server you want to find money. By the way, what Trey is saying, the question that would be is that a fix for the time being? But eventually, that the attitude is, and there could be a. I mentioned a rabbi named Rabbi Nagan who talks about like maybe one day you're talking about like Christians and Muslims and Hindus that are considered Noahides, but like still have their own sort of flavor, so to speak. I think that is long down the road. Like if something like that is practical or even happens, that requires a much bigger reformation. And I don't know, and you could take a different line, which is like, no, I'm locking into a Noahide, let's say a more classic Noahide track, which is I'm not affiliated with the church or with Hinduism or with Islam. Rather, I'm me, part of the Noahide community. And Jacob's not going to like this so much, but this is happening at the same time. And the famous Rambam quote, which is like people have read into that they, Noahides can't build their own communities because, they need the recognition of Israel. As I mentioned in the past, that has only become realistic once Israel has come back. So I see those two things happening at the same time. I know Jacob has a hard time with that, but I think as Israel itself is trying to figure out who it is, then it makes sense. Then there are Gentiles that are trying to do the same.
It's not just Jacob who has a hard time with it, Chezi. You have a hard time with it because earlier you were saying how those people in the government don't represent you.
I of course I have a hard time with that. I'm just saying as Israel is finding itself, it makes sense that the Noahides are also
political government of Israel is irrelevant.
I disagree with that completely because I believe ultimately has to manifest through a political. But
I don't.
Sure. By the way, it's always going to be through a political instrument. Even if it's the Messiah, the one there's still going to be. Are there going to be cleaners? Are there going to be a board? Is there going to be? There's still. These are the instruments we use, right? There's the Rosh, there's the Nasi Beit Din, and there's other people that are not the Nasi Beit Din.
When the Messiah comes, he's not going to end up in jail like the Rosh Menshalah and the chief rabbi and all the various people who you have very mistakenly put your faith into.
These are all birthing pains. But okay. You could look at them as parallels, Jonathan. You could look at that as like clearly in Israel, it's still not defined properly, right? We have this quasi thing called Israel, but yet like Jacob's point, this is clearly not what we were promised.
I had a rant that was scheduled to start a while ago. So my proposal is that we break for 5 minutes so that we can stop. This can stop being the learning Pirkei Avot thing, and we can start in on my little rant. And anyone who wants to is very welcome, especially you, Chezi, to join in when I have that discussion. But my suggestion is we stop the Pirkei Avot stream for now.
I'm just telling Andrew, I would be in good company with Rabbi Akiva. Which, by the way, Maimonides says, and Rabbi Akiva was wrong, and he wasn't the Messiah. But, all right, I will end this stream, and I'll catch you on the flip. Long live the land of Israel.